hi there all, and welcome to this in the first of a new podcast series called Perisseuma, which, if you don't know, is a Greek word which is about abundance. It's a word that means overflow. Jesus talks about out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And that's an image that's really sort of stuck with me for a while. And I've often just been really hungry for the kind of ministry that is the overflow of a love for God, of a conversation with God. And I thought it'd be great to just chat to a whole bunch of friends and people about how you nurture that, how you look after that, how you protect that. So thrilled today to be joined by somebody called David Mann. Is that right? Are you David Mann?
That's right, Jonathan. I'm David Mann, not Dave Mann or anything else that you might want to call me.
You'd love being called Dave. We've established this.
No, you're wrong. You're wrong.
And
just wanted to say,
yes, please.
Thank you for getting in touch about the overflow. I did think that you were calling the plumber for something, but happy to help if you need some advice.
Thank you, because you're very handy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that wasn't my first port of call for today, but you know, while you're on. So Dave and I were in Cardiff Baptist College, as it's called now, training for ministry, what, 20 years ago? It was a long time, wasn't it?
It's bad, isn't it? When you say it was 20 years ago, I find that quite disturbing, but it was.
Yeah, I mean,
Gosh.
I've barely aged at all, but I think the years haven't been as kind to others.
Is this an audio recording? Because anyone that can see you, John, will know that's not true.
Thank you for pointing that out. So we were trained for ministry together. We've done a whole bunch of stuff together over the years, despite being in different parts of the country. We recently did a podcast series together. We should probably plug that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about me.
It is actually. I called It's All About Me. That's one title I never suggested, ironically. Yeah. Called This Pilgrim's Journey. I will stick a link in the description. So, Dave, you've been in ministry in various different shapes and teams and sizes and contexts. The plumber thing aside, we just brush that to one side for a moment. The whole thing about overflow, that our following Jesus, our life in him, and then any gifting, any ministry, any calling, is actually the overflow of something else, of a deeper place within us. But what does that speak to you in terms of how you find just staying connected with Jesus?
So I mentioned this, I think, quite a lot during the podcast series we did on pilgrimage. Something that's been sort of in my head, in my heart about ministry and discipleship for as long as I can remember now, really, and something that I have tried to bring into my ministry, wherever that is, and seek to do so still, is something that I would refer to, and I've shared with you before, as deliberate discipleship. And when you got in touch with me and talked about this overflowing, spiritual overflowing, that's the first thing that came to mind for me. And when I talk about deliberate discipleship, what I mean is, and this sounds a little broad, but it's the easiest way for me to kind of explain it, is that I fear that a lot of people, a lot of our fellowship, people in church, Christians, are depending on a kind of accidental Christianity. And by which I mean they will come to church on a Sunday and they'll be active in that church community on a Sunday. They'll come very determined to hear God's word and to pray and to worship and to be part of that fellowship. And then when it's over, it's parked for the week. And they kind of hope that what happened in that hour will get them through for a week, and they'll come back and accidentally somehow maybe God will do something in their week. And that's very contrary to me, for compared to what I think we're called to be as disciples, which is deliberate. people who every day are deliberately seeking to live their lives following Jesus, to be his disciples. And I think when you talked about overflow, and I got this sense you were talking about the outworking of God's Spirit in us, not because we say, I'm going to sit down right now and try and find what God is speaking about, but it's just, it works out as something else, another conversation or a message or something or a reading. If you're accidentally depending on your communication with God for just 1 hour a week, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be overflowing. You're going to be leaking constantly through the week. Your spiritual, you've got no input, it's output. It's just draining away. Does that sound dreadful? You know what I mean?
I think I can identify with it, if I'm honest, is that we settle into this sort of rhythm, and yeah, sort of accidental growth. So it's almost like I hope that I'll grow by default, but nothing really grows well. It grows stronger. You know, either side of us here, we've got two fantastic gardeners. And you can see just by looking at our gardens which ones are growing by design and deliberate, you know, attention. Thank you for that face. And which one they've been.
I've seen your garden, John. I have seen your back garden, and yeah, it's not that deliberate, is it?
It's not. It's deliberately non-deliberate. If that's deliberately non-deliberate discipleship. I mean, there's another book for you. So I think for me, it's a bit like a while back, you and I decided we're going to walk a Pedovan. And for me, that's like an equivalent. It's like the decision to do it or the desire to do it is one thing. And that can be there as long as you want it to be. But until you stick the boots on and get, like, you know, some serious field under your feet, it's never going to happen. And I wonder sometimes if we settle for a sort of a vision of church, which is as long as people keep coming and as long as the attendance looks okay and as long as you can pay for the things that we need to pay for, we're probably not going to worry about people. Yeah, I noticed this thing a while ago that we've hardly ever deliberately got in contact with people out of the blue unless they hadn't been for about 5 or 6 weeks, which gives the impression all we really want you to do is turn up, and the deeper issues of life, like how you're actually getting on with Jesus and how you're actually following him, and if he's calling you to do anything, and all these kind of massive questions. We don't seriously, deliberately, like, where's the space where we go after that?
Yeah, I think that's really important, insightful thing you've just said there. That I sound critical when I say I think a lot of people are accidental Christians, and that's going to vary in churches and how impactful the church leadership is, because there's a lot of responsibility, I think, of those of us in Christian leadership to be more involved in trying to draw people into that deliberate discipleship, that sense where they can overflow. As you say, if you only wait until someone hasn't been for however many weeks it says in your constitution you're supposed to check them up, or until you think, well, they haven't been, so they've not been putting anything in the offering for a while, if that's the only motivation, then it's not going to spiritually develop them. Whereas if we are better at keeping in touch with people, you know, just in the sense of how's it going at work, how's things, that demonstrates to people that we are interested in their daily lives because God's interested in their daily lives, then we perhaps open something up for them to think about their faith more on a daily basis. But generally, for most people, their engagement with us in leadership, whether that be ministers, deacons, group leaders, will just be at those events on a Sunday or maybe a midweek prayer meeting or something like that. And I'm not discounting that people are busy, people in ministry are busy, in leadership are busy, and people are busy in their lives. But we do have to take some responsibility for the sort of, I don't, is apathy a fair enough word? That lethargy that I think has struck the church at the moment, where basically Monday to Saturday it takes a back seat.
Yeah.
And I know in the past, in my own ministry, there are times where I felt probably quite critical of people that have dropped out of things or not getting involved. And then if I look back, right now, I suppose I can think, but was I getting in touch with them before this happened? Was there a connection being maintained? And I think there's something we've got to sort of look at there.
Yeah, and in terms of deliberate discipleship, that connection's two-way, isn't it? If it's going to work in a healthy way. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about you know, the things that we sort of value, you know, and how that works itself out. And I remember having a conversation years ago with an incredible guy who'd been pastor of the church where I am now, and then gone into chaplaincy. And we were just talking about the difference between ministry and chaplaincy. And he said that he's a vastly intelligent bloke and loved to talk about different models of ministry. And he said, one of the things I miss now, he said, I love the caring side of chaplaincy. But what I really miss is the coaching side of ministry. And that really got me thinking about how much, as a minister, I see myself as a coach, you know, rather than just coming in, you know, the spiritual ambulance when something goes wrong, or am I there, you know, figuratively in the rough and the tumble, sort of coaching, and that was a really helpful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I like that image, that model of. I think you're right. We tend to just, we're there to teach on a Sunday, to give some wise words, or maybe not on your case, but to say something that we think is going to be meaningful on the day. But the rest of the time, how are we getting alongside people? How are they seeing what's going on in our lives? And maybe somewhere there there's an answer to that. That is, well, do we really want them to see what's going on in our lives, or how well we're doing?
Yeah.
And you know, I suppose you know that I'm no longer in full-time church-based ministry, but have stepped away from that for various reasons, but partly a sense of calling into something a bit different. And that's this retreats thing that I really felt God putting on my heart. And it was a little bit during my sabbatical, but then during the time of my move from Cambridge up to Birmingham, and then eventually back to Cardiff, a real sense of pain in ministry, church ministry at the moment. People that I talk to, colleagues, friends, and very often what I was hearing from them were things that I'd experienced myself in my time in ministry, and that was tiredness, even exhaustion from the physical, practical, mental, emotional demands of ministry, church leadership, and many of them questioning how much longer they could carry on really doing it. Pandemic didn't help that. I know that put a lot more different challenges on many of us. But what I sense is that we need to do something to try and encourage ministers at the moment. And when we talk about overflowing, we could talk for a long time about those that are sitting in the chairs in front of us, but I wonder how many of us in leadership would actually say we feel the Spirit is overflowing in our lives and around, or in actual fact, are we feeling quite dry, quite empty because of all those other pressures and things that are going on? And so the Retreats project, which we're sort of in the middle of launching here, and sort of a little bit of that is happening next week when you're coming with some ministers. For a bit of a retreat at home here. We've got some cabins, some properties that we've developed, and we're looking to offer 2 people in ministry in church ministry, an opportunity just to get away for a couple of days, for a weekend, just a break away, and as well as recognizing that spiritual, emotional, mental, physical exhaustion, I'm also aware of the challenges for most ministers on their finances and time, the difficulty of actually being able to justify getting away and the costs of it. And it's, let's be honest, ministry isn't up there as one of the top 10 paid salaries. I don't think we were in the bracket of having our tax changed.
I don't know. Nowhere
by
near.
The Prime Minister.
No, she's leaving us.
We Diane, my partner, and I have set this up in a way that we want to offer this out to people in ministry, and it's just a space for people to try and get some refreshing, try and find a space away from the day-to-day where that overflowing gets just lost amongst everything else. But I think, getting back to the point, we need to do that in ministry. We, as ministers, as leaders, whether that's, as I say, pastors or deacons or group leaders or youth leaders, we need to be getting ourselves refreshed and getting ourselves back onto a journey of daily experiencing the Spirit moving in us and seeing how that leads from one thing to another and takes us on journeys that we weren't anticipating, because that Spirit is overflowing. And we want to have an impact. You talked about being a coach. The coaches, the best coaches of sports teams in the world are those who have been players, who have been there, who know what it's like to have to do that. And we need to just kind of get ourselves reconnected with the realities of what's going on. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble.
No, not at all. And I think you made one or two points there about sometimes it can be hard to justify doing it in terms of time or cost. But at a deeper level, I think we can struggle to justify just spending that time on God and allowing God to spend that on us. I know when a guy called Andy, I'm going to say his name wrong, probably Perisseuma, I think is how you pronounce it. He spoke at the ministers' conference, and he's recently written a book about Sabbathing or sabbaticaling or however you say it. You could tell we don't do it often, we don't even know how to say it. But he was saying one of the things that we've got to realize is that God puts this provision into the rhythm of the week, into the rhythm of life, because we're worth it to God. And I know I wasn't the only one that sort of took a little bit of I had a lump in my throat at that point, because we're used to hearing about it in terms of it's a wise thing to do, it's a smart thing, it's an efficiency thing, but actually this is just about God's care for us. God loves us, and if we're not rooted in that, we've got nothing to offer. Paul talks about this, doesn't he, and says, if I can have, speak in the language of heaven, I can faith that moves mountains. But if it's not love, at its core, if it's not from love and for love and towards love, it's just noise at the end of the day. Words filling the air, and none of us want to give our lives to that. It's just not who we are. And so deliberately carving out that space to go, I just need to spend time on God, and that's it.
Yeah. Have you done things like marriage course in Bethel?
Not for a long time, but yeah.
I remember we ran marriage course, and before we did it, we went with some of the leaders and went on a marriage course in another church locally. And one of the things that really struck me then was this idea of marriage time.
Wait, so just when you say we, he doesn't mean me and him, just so
No, not you and me. No, gosh.
I wanted to be clear. We get on.
No, but you are someone else's problem. And, we pray for Amy constantly, really.
Please do.
But getting back to the point, the marriage time concept of the marriage course, this idea that as a couple, if you want to stay connected, if you want to have good communication, if you want to understand each other, if you want to love each other better and know how each other love and all the rest of it, you have to make time.
Yeah.
And in that course, they talk about, you put it in your diary and it has the same priority as everything else you've got going on. Whatever work it is, whatever church life, you don't take it out because something else crops up. And that same model should be applying to our own ministry lives.
Yeah.
And when I did that pilgrimage as part of my sabbatical for 7 weeks, all I had to do was get up, walk, go to sleep. And in that time, I had so much time just to hear from God and reflect on the things that he was sort of saying to me through the walk. When I came back, one of the things I changed in my weekly pattern was I treated a day that was about me being with God. And that would be half a day or a day a week, not my day off, because that was the day when I had to go and try and do other things practically, to stop the house falling down or buy food to give to the kids and things. But a day where I wasn't supposed to be writing my sermon or making sure some constitutional documents were sorted, but a day or a half day when the purpose was for me to sit in the presence of God and to try and then get people to understand the value of that in church, that I wasn't skiving.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing nothing.
Yeah.
I was being still.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just being still with God. Now, we need to be not embarrassed about that or afraid to go and say to our church leadership and our fellowship, do you know what? I need to have that space in my week, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to bring to you what God is bringing to me, because I'll never know what he's bringing to me.
And it won't be out of the overflow of that.
No, it'll be out of the rush
Yeah.
of trying to fit all these things. That's not overflow. That's trying to squeeze into all the other stuff that we do. And so it ends up being shaped by our emotions and our mental state. And when that has been pressed in on by the world, when the world is pushing in on us, that's going to have an influence on what we're able to give out. And that thing about overflowing of the Spirit is, I see two things on it. One is it's that sense that Spirit can feed others, but also if the Spirit is overflowing, it's just washing everything else that's not healthy out of us. It's pushing it out of us. And that makes us much more able to hear from God and understand the sort of what he's calling us to do. And that sounds super spiritual, but it's just a practicality.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were talking about, and I don't know where he writes about it. It might be Wounded Healer, I don't know. But Henri Nouwen talks about his journey of being like Harvard professor, somebody who was known and respected, and he knew what he was doing in that world and who he was, etc. And then he feels called to go and be part of the LARC community for people born with severe mental and physical disabilities. And he sort of walks in and goes, right, what do you want me to do? And they're like, all right, well, that person needs a walk, they need their food, there's some washing up needs doing, and he's just like, no, I'm Henri Nouwen. I could be. Do you need me to talk to you guys about training or strategy and he writes beautifully anyway, but he writes beautifully about this whole thing about I had to come to a place where I was utterly irrelevant to the situation and still know that God could love me and use me, could fully realize the depth of his love. And I think there's something about that actually, if we're honest, we all say, oh, we're really busy, or we need more time off or whatever. But it's only us that is going back in and checking emails or replying to messages or putting things in the diary. Nobody else is doing that for us. So there is this little part of the human part of us that is drawn to this like a magnet. Let me know I'm useful. Let me know I'm doing something. rather than this place of being. You know, like you talk about being still. It can feel like a guilty pleasure. You know, it can feel like, well, sometimes it can feel so guilty it's not pleasurable. But it can feel like I'm wasting time. You know, I'm wasting time on my own time or family time. But without it, what have we got to offer?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to be imaginative about how we go about that. I've got this. I've recently started alongside setting up the retreats project. I've started some work for the Home Office, and I go into, for the first time in my life, I'm actually commuting to work. You know, rather than living next door to the church. And so 2 days a week at the moment, sometimes 3 days a week, I catch the train in. And Diane and I were sort of talking about, well, you know, I could drive in and it would probably save me 30 minutes, 40 minutes of the whole process in and out. But for me, actually going in on the train is a much easier, a much healthier thing, because I don't have to concentrate on that. I don't have to get the train going in the right direction or anything like that. And it gives me that space before I get to work just to have a bit of time of reflection. I can chuck my earphones in and just listen to something, just reflect. And if I'd been driving in and out, I just have to focus on that, because apparently you're supposed to pay attention when you're driving.
I think you've been told to focus because you are a terrible driver. So I think that's the adage. But
that is just so not true. But anyway,
which bit?
Well, any of it. But yeah, and so being deliberate. So making a choice. It means I have to get up a little bit earlier. But it means that by the time I get to work at 7:30, I've already had 20 minutes or so in the morning that I've spent just kind of reflecting and trying to just listen a little bit to God. And sometimes that's not so easy if the train carriage is chaotic or whatever. But it does mean that it's a lot easier to start the day feeling encouraged and positive.
I know that the mornings, Sunday mornings, when I walk down to church, usually because my teenage kids aren't even out of bed by the time I leave. But something happens on the walk, and I've often thought to myself, you spend time preparing, reading, listening, crafting, all the rest of it. But maybe I just need to go for a longer walk, because it's often there that things drop into place or things start to take a shape or a different direction. But it's kind of strange that you've got to get away from all the tools, all the equipment, you're trained to do. You have to actually do that and then walk away from it.
It was a key thing that I sort of encountered in my sabbatical, going on the pilgrimage, because for various reasons my sabbatical got delayed a couple of times, and I'd originally had this idea of something I wanted to research and write on, and was going to get really clever and be very academic. You know, I can't imagine why I thought that was going to work at all. But now, as I reflect back, I'm so glad that I didn't do that. That I took that time instead to just make myself available to listen to God and let Him take me on a journey for 7 weeks. Just speak to me, and it transformed me that time. And that wouldn't have happened if I'd sat reading through all sorts of documents and journals and researching stuff and getting lost in that.
And it's really interesting, and I know this comes up on the podcast series that we did together, but the seeds.
Sorry, which podcast was that?
That was This Pilgrim's Journey.
Oh yes.
Cool. Yes. Oh, it's all about me. So that was what it was called.
Yeah.
But what you're doing now, God was sowing some of the seeds of that back then, but who knows if you would have seen it, heard it, without deliberately carving out, and 7 weeks, and what was it, 555 miles?
550 miles. Yeah.
550. Sorry, I've added another 5 there. I do apologize.
Well, you discounted 5 when I had to get on a train for a mile, and when I had to go on the bus to get some blister plasters for Chris. So I think you were
But
quite critical of those bits.
even though you still have to explain. But without that serious chunk of space and time. So yeah, yeah. So
Overflowing, you got to let, if you want to fill up the bath, you got to turn the taps on and you just got to let it go. You just to overflow. If we wanted to make the bath overflow, we just never would we? Because we'd sit by the bath and just before it overflowed, we'd turn the taps off and we'd be worried and we'd be up and downstairs to make sure it didn't overflow. But we have to. We've got to let the spirit go, and to do that, we've got to stop overthinking it and trying to pack it into the way we, business-wise, it should happen. We just got to make space to let those things happen so that they run one into another. Abundance of God's grace and love being experienced in our own lives, but then just running into the other things that we do. And as ministers, if we're going to minister grace and love and mercy and wonder and awe, we've got to be filled up with it. And my experience of church ministry is that it can become so busy and demanding, you don't get to see a lot of that.
Yeah, it's a little bit like when you're on holiday and you see something that you think's brilliant, so you drag your kids to this museum or art gallery or something, and you can tell, and the kids can tell, the difference between the people who are really passionate about the stuff they've got and those who are just doing it, just reading a script or just playing a part. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? You are right. If we don't want to just talk to people about awe and wonder, transformation, or calling, or passion, or whatever it is, but if we want to be those who are in it, you have to live it, and that does mean carving out that time.
I can remember earlier this year, Diane and I went on a trip to Highgrove to just walk around the gardens, and the guide was just so fabulous. They really told a story and wove this story for the whole of the sort of hour that we were walking around the gardens. And it was fabulous. You really felt drawn into it and came away. And I can remember reflecting back on a time when I lived in Romania, and I went with some of the kids from the family that I was living with at the time, and we went to visit the museum in the town in Alba Iulia, big museum. Quite impressive in some ways. But you walked in, and firstly, the person on the desk was surprised to see that you wanted to come and look at this stuff in the museum. And then there was this kind of shrug of their shoulders, and they're like, okay. So they get from the desk and they go and they open the door to the first room, and they sort of would go on in there, and they just stand by the door. Oh, they turn the lights on first. So you walk through this room, and then when they think you've got fire, they turn the lights off, they come and they open the next door. There's nothing inviting, there's nothing passionate about it. It's just, yes, you've come to see all this old Roman stuff. Why? And then they can't wait for you to go. Do you know, if we're not passionate about it, and how are we going to get passionate about it if we're not getting close to God ourselves? I think most of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, would have to say there are times, if I looked at myself, I would not see the passion that I want to see in other people. And why is that?
And I guess you could ask sort of a really sort of practical question on, so if you were to pull out that, whatever it is, your app or your calendar or your diary, does it look like somebody who's serious about spending time with God, for God? Or does it look like someone that's pulled about by the next urgent thing, that you're just reacting constantly? Because that's default, isn't it? If it's not deliberate, then
yeah. And justifying what you think the expectations of your church are, and maybe they are, and so maybe there's a conversation you've got to have with them about what do you think is going to make me better at what I do, make me better equipped to serve you and help you on that journey.
I mean, I'm not even sure if being better is the desired outcome necessarily, because there's plenty.
Well,
of
you've never been better at anything.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. I've never been better. It's
well, that's not quite. No,
well,
it's history.
No, but when I edit this, that's where we're going to end. That's going to be the amazing. Well, thank you, Dave. And we're looking forward to the great id. There's another podcast series for us. We're looking forward to being up with you guys, and I should just give a shout out and say that if anybody can't make it next week or is listening to this after the event, then I think it's fair to say the offer's still open, and this is something that you guys are looking to seriously explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep an eye out. We're hoping to get some information out through regional teams and others. And there's other elements to it, but maybe that's for another day to share.
Amazing. Thank you, Dave. See you soon.
Thank you. God bless, mate.
God bless.
Bye.